everyone, we're here to talk to you today about our findings and predictions regarding succession in Point Pleasant Park following Hurricane Juan.
In the fall of 2003, Hurricane Juan hit the coast of Nova Scotia as a Category 2 storm. It tore through the edge of the province and ripped apart Point Pleasant Park, located in the south end of Halifax, forcing closure of the park for 8 months. Following the 2003 hurricane, the park lost over 70% of its canopy. This loss of habitat and structure allowed for new niches to arise, but also caused the destruction of others. This provided a basis for secondary succession. The park experienced slow recovery after the hurricane, with effects still showing today. In addition to the intense effects of the hurricane, the natural location of the park along the windy coast of Halifax may have contributed to a slower recovery of the forest than if it was more inland. Halifax and Point Pleasant Park are located within the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The park traditionally was known as Amnugati and is a significant Mi'kmaq gathering place. Following colonization of the land, it served as a British defense site, and to this day you can still find military structures throughout the park. Today, Point Pleasant Park is used by the public for its extensive trails and ocean view in addition to its cultural impact and history. Point Pleasant Park is an Acadian forest system deemed overmature before the hurricane and conifer dominant, with the red spruce as the dominant climax species. We will be looking at the effects of secondary succession on density of tree species throughout the park. This is the change in ecological community over time following a destructive disturbance. It's important to study secondary succession to understand how ecosystems rebuild and recover. It helps us understand if ecosystems like Point Pleasant Park will return to their natural state or if it will transition into a new equilibrium. Studying secondary succession will give us insight into forest regeneration, the role of disturbances in transforming ecological communities, and how species dynamics change. We will be examining what Point Pleasant Park is in recovery by analyzing how forest community changed following the hurricane, specifically looking at how density of dominant species shifted and how community-level diversity evolved. Data was collected from 2004 to 2025, measuring the density of species as well as the average diameter of trees to calculate richness, Shannon diversity, and Paleo's evenness. We use both null and alternative hypotheses to structure our testing process. The null states that there is no significant change, while the alternative indicates there is significant change and outlines what we expect to occur. We ask these hypotheses to help us analyze each change and to determine the impact of secondary succession on Point Pleasant Park. Based on our alternatives, we first say that many dominant trees were removed, allowing many new trees to grow over time, therefore increasing total tree density over time. 2. The red spruce is an intermediate to late successional organism, therefore will decrease in density as it will not thrive in early successional environment. 3. Shannon diversity index is dependent on species richness and evenness, therefore it would increase since almost all dominant species were removed, allowing more pioneer species to grow with an even distribution.
Ecology students from Dalhousie University studied heavily impacted sites, which were 20 by 20 meters. The students measured sites from 2004 to 2025, excluding 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020 due to external factors. They measured the diameter at breast height of trees taken 4.5 feet from the ground using a diameter measuring tape. All trees which had a diameter of 2.5 centimeters or greater were identified by tree type. The total number, density of tree species, and the Shannon diversity index were calculated and recorded per study area. We used linear regression analysis to study how tree species, and their densities changed after Hurricane Juan. Since the specific study sites had variation each year, we could not represent the data with a line graph. The linear regression model shows the trends of the data. A linear regression analysis was performed to identify whether total tree density in Point Pleasant Park increased over time after Hurricane Juan. Our null hypothesis was that tree density would not increase over time. Total tree density per 400 meters squared was measured in the park after the hurricane. As you can see in Figure 1, there was a significant positive relationship in total tree density in time. Our R-squared value was 0.4485, which shows moderate correlation between total density and time. Our F value was 72.38, and our P value was 3.921 times 10 to the negative 13. Therefore, tree density is recovering after the hurricane and can be estimated with the regression equation shown in Figure 1. Since total tree density is recovering after Hurricane Juan, the forest community is regrowing. Prior to this hurricane, Point Pleasant Park was classified as a mature and overmature forest. The largest trees were white pines. During 2017 and 2018 field surveys, approximately half of the park was found to be in early successional stages, with smaller sites in later stages. Hurricanes can blow large trees down and allow for new forest growth. Since a lot of Point Pleasant was mature, the older trees blown down changed the forest community. Since the 2003 hurricane, the forest is regrowing and showing earlier successional stages. As this forest grows towards its climax community, which is when the forest is stable and mature, I predict that the forest will grow similarly to how the forest was before the 2003 hurricane due to its previous maturity and stability.
For the analysis of change in the 2004 dominant species, red spruce, a linear regression was performed and results are shown in Figure 2. Our null hypothesis stated that there would be no change in dominant species density. Based on the results, there appeared to be a slight increase over time from an average of 6 trees per 400 meters squared in 2004 to an average of 8 trees per 400 meters squared in 2025. The regression showed an increasing slope of 0.34 trees per 400 meters squared per year and an R squared value of 0.13, as well as an F value of 13.36 and a P value less than 0.01. This indicates that about 13% of the variance can be determined by year, and a p-value less than 0.01 indicates there's a strong evidence that the change was not by chance, and therefore we must reject our null hypothesis that there is no change in density of dominant species. Results are shown below in Figure 3 for the linear regression analysis of change in 2025 dominant species, the red maple. There appeared to be a dramatic increase over time from an average of 0 trees per 400 meters squared in 2004 to an average of 30 trees per 400 meters squared in 2025. The regression showed an increasing slope of 2.2 trees per 400 meters squared per year and an R squared value of 0.13, an F value of 13.9, and a P value less than 0.01. This indicates that about 14% of the variance can be determined by year and that there is a statistically significant relationship between the two. A p-value less than 0.01 indicates that there is strong evidence that the change was not by chance. The shift in dominance from red spruce to red maple is most likely because of the decrease in canopy cover following both Hurricane Juan as well as the brown spruce longhorn beetle containment strategy that took place just before 2003, where many red spruce trees were cut down due to infestation. Both contributed to an increase in light availability, which allowed for the red maple, which are shade-intolerant species, to undergo rapid increase. The red maple was able to increase in density faster than the red spruce could reestablish density, and therefore overtook becoming the dominant species. Therefore, we must reject our null hypothesis. As the forest progresses towards a climax community, canopy cover will increase and light availability will decrease. Shade-tolerant and intermediate late successional species, like the red spruce, may increase in density as other species, like the red maple, returns to its original state and decreases.
We also use linear regression analysis to examine the relationship between the Point Pleasant Park Shannon Diversity Index and time after Hurricane Juan. This resulted in a significant positive relationship between the Shannon Diversity Index and time, with time explaining 33% of the variation in the index. Due to the results of this analysis, we reject the null hypothesis that the Shannon Diversity Index would not increase over time. The Shannon Diversity Index has increased over the years since Hurricane Juan. As this index covers both species richness and evenness, the result's not all that surprising. The hurricane reset ecological succession by removing 70% of the canopy cover. This allowed shade-intolerant pioneer species to colonize the area, adding to the existing survivors and increasing species richness. This would in turn increase the Shannon Diversity Index, as it is dependent on richness. The increase in diversity can also be explained by the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, in which diversity increases in response to moderate disturbance levels. We predict that as the forest approaches its climax community, the Shannon Diversity Index will plateau. Typically, as the forest reaches later stages of secondary succession, larger trees dominate the area. This would lead to an increase in canopy cover and shade, reducing the survivability of shade-intolerant pioneer species. It would also decrease species richness, but increase species evenness, leading to a consistent diversity index. We can already see this slightly in our regression figure. The green overlaying line generally follows the densest collection of points on the graph. We can see that while the index has slowly increased over time, it appears to be slowly stabilizing in recent years. However, this line was not calculated. It was simply added post-analysis to emphasize a visual trend. Based on the results of our analysis and previous research, we predict that Point Pleasant is currently at an early to mid-successional stage. Firstly, the current dominant species is classified by the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources as a mid-successional vegetation type. Secondly, some studies claim that Point Pleasant was in a stage of early succession as recent as 2015 due to the sharp increase in diversity. They also state that diversity would begin to decrease as forest matured, which is consistent with our diversity index graph. Additionally, the University of Chicago indicates that intermediate species dominate a forest in mid-succession, and that this typically occurs anywhere between 5 and 150 years into the succession process. This further supports the idea that Point Pleasant is an early to mid-succession. It's also important to note that because this is an urban park, succession may have been impacted. After the hurricane, most dead trees were removed from the park, which can deplete soil nutrients and impact the progress of secondary succession. Luckily, this was mostly avoided due to a management strategy. Additionally, the many park trails can act as corridors for non-native species that originally bordered Point Pleasant to slowly integrate into the park by growing along the trail borders, thereby replacing the removed native vegetation. We would also like to mention that it is important to consider Indigenous knowledge during the recovery of Point Pleasant. One teaching, called Two-Eyed Seeing, encourages the integration of Western science and Indigenous knowledge. In the context of Point Pleasant, this integration could shift restoration techniques from only focusing on ecological metrics to also focusing on the restoration of culturally significant native plants within the park. By integrating these two areas of knowledge, we may also learn to naturally treat the land with more respect and encourage responsible recovery plans. We received a few questions regarding our study that we figured we would answer for you. The questions are at the top of the slides. Of the common species included in our data analysis, those displayed on screen are non-native. As aforementioned, non-native species have increased opportunities to integrate further into Point Pleasant due to the park trails, but despite the availability, these plants continue to largely remain around the park borders. Studies suggest that this is due to the non-native species not being adapted to the incredibly acidic soils deeper into Point Pleasant. So, most of the competition will occur at the park borders and not largely impact Central Park recovery. Furthermore, the non-native trees are mostly intermediately shade tolerant or completely shade intolerant, with maples and beeches being the only primarily tolerant species. So, when canopy cover increases as the forest approaches its climax community, most non-native species will also be outcompeted unless they're at the border. Additionally, only the Norway maple is actually considered to be invasive. If left to grow naturally, it poses the risk of significantly hindering native plant growth. However, Halifax already has this covered. Their Point Pleasant Park Forest Work Plan outlines how they have been removing Norway maples from the park, in addition to the removal of many immature non-native species. In fact, the only trees not on that list are the European beech, European ash, and the wych elm, which stay at the park borders anyway. So realistically, non-native species are not really that large of an issue due to human efforts, if not the soil acidity and the shade tolerance.
With more frequent and/or more intense storms, we can expect to see a change in the species present and their frequency in Point Pleasant Park. This increase in intensity and frequency disrupts tree establishment, which could increase the frequency of species that can adapt to these storms, as they will be more likely to survive. Due to these storms, trees fall and break, creating a layer of dead woody material on the ground. Some species prefer these environments for growth, so we may see more of them growing in the park. There may also be more plants in early successional stages. The disruption of the storms can affect many plants, meaning that they may have to reestablish after each large storm. The species frequency and change directly impacts the community stability, and these differences will create a new climax community with new stability.
As Point Pleasant Park regenerates, it will move towards a climax forest community. As the result of this maturity, there will be an increase in canopy cover due to tree growth and development. Therefore, there will be a decrease in light availability, as well as a potential decrease in soil temperature and increase in moisture. This will benefit shade-tolerant species like the red spruce or sugar maples and cause a growth in density. This maturity, however, will negatively impact and not benefit shade-intolerant trees like the red maple or the balsam poplar, causing a decrease in density. We would like to acknowledge that Halifax, Nova Scotia, including Dalhousie University and Point Pleasant Park, are situated on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. We would like to acknowledge the work of the BIOL2060 teaching team for instructing us in lecture and lab, as well as acknowledge the work of past and present BIOLOgy2060 students who have collected the data to make this project possible, as well as putting the project together. We would also like to thank the sources we used for this project to make it possible.